The smell hit Darren Cole first. Metal. Hot grease. Something burnt and never cleaned. He had worked in 100 stations across 4 systems, and they all smelled the same when their ventilation was running below capacity. This one was worse. He had not planned to stop at Durkas. His cargo run was supposed to take him straight through this sector without docking. But a bad docking code planted in his ship's registry. Bad because someone at the last port had entered the wrong numbers, had flagged him for impoundment the moment he dropped out of the jump corridor. 2 Vreth patrol ships had been on him before his engines cooled. Now his freighter sat locked behind a docking seal he could not open, and he sat in a holding bay that smelled like a furnace. The Vreth were large. That was the first thing anyone noticed. The guards who brought him in were nearly 8 feet tall, covered in thick plates of dark natural armor along their shoulders and necks, and they looked at him the way a person looks at a stray animal that has wandered into their kitchen. Not with hatred, with something worse. Indifference, just barely above contempt. Station Commander Rovak had seen him for exactly 4 minutes. He was built like a slab of rock that had learned to walk and hold a rank insignia. He told Darren, in flat and passable trade tongue, that the docking dispute would be resolved through proper Vreth administrative channels. This could take days. It could take longer. Until then, Darren would stay in the holding bay, eat from the standard provisions left by the door, and make no trouble. Darren had nodded and said nothing else. There was nothing useful to say. The holding bay was large, meant for cargo or maybe prisoners who were bigger than him. There was a bunk bolted to one wall and a light source that buzzed faintly at a frequency that would have driven most people to distraction. Darren barely noticed the buzzing. He was too focused on something else. The floor was vibrating. Not much. Not in any way that a person would notice if they were not paying attention. But Darren had spent 20 years with his hands on machines, and his hands had learned to hear things that his ears could not. He sat on the floor of the holding bay, pressed both palms flat against the deck plating, and listened. The vibration was uneven. It came in a pattern, not a smooth hum, but a series of small pulses with a slight lag between them, like a heartbeat that was losing its rhythm. He had felt something like this once before, in a colony power plant on the edge of a farming system. The drive core there had been failing for weeks before anyone noticed. By the time they called him in, they had about 3 days before a full shutdown. He pulled a small notebook from the inside pocket of his jacket and began writing down the pulse timing. He used a short metal pen with no electronics in it, old habit from working in high-interference environments. He counted the pulses, noted the lag, counted again. A shadow fell across the doorway. He looked up. A young Vreth was standing at the entrance to the holding bay. Younger than the guards, smaller, without the full shoulder plating. His uniform marked him as station crew, not military. A maintenance worker, probably. He was staring at Darren with an expression that was harder to read. Not contempt, not indifference. Something closer to confusion. Darren held up the notebook briefly, then pointed at the floor. The young Vreth said nothing, but he did not leave either. Darren looked down at his numbers again and did the calculation twice to make sure. He was not wrong. The lag between pulses was increasing at a rate of about 4% per day. At that rate, the harmonic stress on the drive housing would reach a critical threshold in roughly 9 days. Maybe 10 if the compensators were being pushed hard. Probably less if whoever was running engineering kept doing what they were doing. He closed the notebook. He looked at the young Vreth in the doorway. He thought about staying quiet, keeping his head down, waiting for the bureaucratic process to grind through and spit out his clearance, flying away and leaving whatever was coming to come. He thought about it for about 4 seconds. Your drive core is going to fail in about 9 days, he said. His trade tongue was not perfect, but it was good enough. I can fix it, or I can watch it happen. The young Vreth stared at him. Darren tucked the notebook back into his jacket and laid down on the bunk. The floor kept vibrating beneath him, quiet and patient and counting down, and he listened to it until his eyes closed. By the second day, word had reached Chief Engineer Merg. Merg was not a gentle being at the best of times. He had 30 years of station engineering behind him and a temper that his crew worked carefully around, the way you walk around a tool that has been left on the edge of a table. When Rovak's aide delivered the message that the human prisoner in Holding Bay 7 was claiming imminent drive core failure, Merg read it twice, set it down, and then crumpled it slowly with one large hand. He went to see Darren not because he believed him, He went because Rovak had asked him to, and Rovak was not the kind of commander you ignored. Darren was sitting on the floor again when Murg arrived, writing in his notebook. He stood when Murg entered, which was the right thing to do in the presence of a senior Vreth, and he held out the notebook with both hands. Murg did not take it. The drive core is stable, Murg said. The compensators are managing the output variance. This is normal station behavior. The compensators are masking the symptom, Darren said. They're not fixing the cause. The harmonic cycle in the primary housing is off by about 3 milliseconds. That number is growing. When it gets to around 8 or 9 milliseconds, the housing mounts are going to start taking lateral stress they weren't built for. Murg looked at him for a long moment. The look was not curious. It was the look of a person who has been told something they find deeply unpleasant, not because it might be true, but because the source of the information is someone they do not respect. You are a cargo runner, Murg said. You fly freight between outposts. You are not an engineer. I'm a mechanic, Darren said. There's a difference. Engineers design things. Mechanics fix them when they break. He paused. Your drive core is going to break. Murg left without another word. Darren sat back down on the floor and kept writing. That evening, he asked the young maintenance worker, who had been appearing in the doorway more often now, sometimes for 20 minutes at a stretch, if there was a way to send a document to Commander Rovak directly. Not through Murg. Directly. The young Vreth, whose name Darren had not yet learned, was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly and pointed down the corridor. It took Darren an hour and a translation tool on his wrist unit to write the document in enough Vreth script that it would be readable. He did not write it as a complaint or a demand. He wrote it as a courtesy notice, a professional observation from one technician to his station commander. He laid out the pulse timing data, the lag increase rate, the projected stress transfer, and the estimated failure window. He kept it short. He kept it clear. He slid it under the door of the station's administrative message drop, as directed, and went back to the bunk. On the third day, a secondary coolant line on the eastern drive flank ruptured. Darren heard it from the holding bay, not the rupture itself, but the change in the station's sound afterward. A shift in airflow, a brief drop in the background hum, the kind of thing most people would not notice. He sat up on the bunk and checked his notebook. He had written, 2 days earlier, that lateral stress would begin showing in the secondary systems first. The eastern flank coolant lines were listed by name. He did not feel satisfaction. He felt the particular quiet dread of being right about something you hoped you were wrong about. Murg's official report to Rovak called the coolant rupture unrelated to the drive core, a standard fatigue failure on an aging line. Routine. Rovak read the report. Then he read Darren's document again. Then he sent for Darren. The commander's office was smaller than Darren expected. Functional. No decorations except for a single piece of Vreth battle marking on the wall behind the desk, carved in deep lines that Darren could not read. Rovak was standing when Darren entered, which Darren understood was not the default. Rovak picked up the document from his desk and set it down again without saying anything about it. How long have you been doing this? Rovak asked. Darren considered the question properly before answering it. Since I was 12. My father kept our colony's power plant running with scrap wire and whatever he could barter. He couldn't afford to hire engineers. I learned to listen to machines because if I didn't, the lights went out and people got cold. He looked at Rovak steadily. I've been listening to your floor since the first hour I was here. The machine is telling you something. I wrote it down. Rovak looked at him for a long time. Not with contempt. Not with warmth either. With something in between that Darren did not yet have a name for. Murg will take you to the engineering bay tomorrow, Rovak said finally. You will look. Nothing more, until I decide otherwise. Darren nodded. That's enough, he said. The engineering shafts beneath the primary drive housing were not built for comfort. They were built to hold enormous machines, and the machines generated heat and electromagnetic interference in amounts that forced the Vreth engineers to work in short rotations. 20 minutes in, 20 minutes out. Even Murg followed the rotation without complaint. The radiation made his armor sensors inaccurate, and inaccurate sensors in a Vreth engineer were something close to blindness. Darren went in and stayed. Human biology absorbed the electromagnetic interference differently. It was not comfortable, exactly. He felt it as a low pressure behind his eyes and a faint warmth in his fingertips. But it was manageable. and manageable meant he could work uninterrupted while the Vreth engineers cycled in and out around him. The young maintenance worker, Grad, Darren had finally learned his name, had been formally assigned as his supervisor. This was, technically, a polite way of saying that Darren was not to be left alone near the station's critical systems. Darren did not mind. Grad was quiet. He watched carefully, and he handed over tools when asked without making it awkward. The Vreth tools were too large for Darren's hands. He spent the first hour in the engineering bay at a workbench, modifying a set of his own mechanics tools with materials from the station's scrap bin. A smaller grip here, a narrower head there. Grat watched him do this without comment, but with the particular attention of someone who is seeing a method they have not encountered before and is not yet sure what to make of it. The drive core itself was impressive up close. It was a Vreth design, built for raw output rather than efficiency, which was part of the problem. The harmonic resonance cycle, the timing of the energy pulses through the core housing, had never been tuned. The Vreth engineering philosophy assumed that if something was not visibly broken, it did not need adjustment. The result was a machine that had been running slightly wrong for so long that the wrongness had become part of its normal state, eating at the housing mounts one invisible vibration at a time. Darren explained this to Grad in simple terms while he worked. He did not do it to show off. He did it because explaining things out loud helped him think, and because Grat was clearly absorbing everything he said, even when he appeared to be looking elsewhere. The core produces energy in waves, Darren said, pressing a calibrated sensor against the drive housing and reading the numbers on his wrist unit. The waves are supposed to arrive at the housing at regular intervals. If they're even slightly off, the housing absorbs a small impact every cycle instead of a smooth flow. Multiply that impact by about 8 million cycles a day, and eventually the housing starts to move. Grat looked at the housing mounts. They were thick, heavy Vreth construction. He looked back at Darren. How do you fix the timing? Grat asked. You adjust the phase relay on the secondary injector ring, Darren said, in very small amounts. You listen for the change in the resonance pattern, and you correct until the pattern is smooth. He paused. There is no Vreth term for this process. I checked your technical manuals last night. The concept isn't in them. Grat was quiet for a moment. Because we replace the part when it fails, he said. We do not adjust the cycle. I know, Darren said, but you can't replace a drive housing while the station is running. And you're about 6 days from needing to. He had been working for about 4 hours when Merg came down to the shafts for his rotation. He stood at the edge of the work area and watched Darren for a while, without speaking. Then he reached past Darren and adjusted a setting on the secondary compensator panel, pushing the output compensation higher, the same solution he had been applying for weeks. The sensor on Darren's wrist unit immediately showed a spike in the lateral stress reading. Darren reached over calmly and reversed the adjustment. That compensator is not helping, he said. He did not raise his voice. Every time you push the output compensation higher, you're increasing the pressure on the housing mounts from the other direction. You've been fighting the vibration by adding to the load. The mounts are being stressed from both sides now. Merg said nothing. I'm not guessing, Darren said. He turned his wrist unit toward Merg and showed him the numbers. This is what your compensator setting reads on the stress sensor. This is what it reads when I reverse it. The second number is smaller. A smaller number means the mounts are under less strain. He looked at Merg. The fix is a phase relay adjustment, not more compensator output. I can show you the calculation if you want to see it. Merg stared at the numbers. He was an experienced engineer. He could read a stress sensor. The numbers said exactly what Darren said they said. He stepped back from the panel. He did not speak. He did not argue. In Vreth terms, it was the closest thing to admitting error that the culture produced, and it was done quietly, in front of Grat and 2 other engineers who had come down for their rotation. Darren turned back to the drive core and kept working. Later, during the walk back to the holding bay, Grat fell into step beside him. You were not angry, Grat said, when Merg changed your setting. No, Darren said. Why not? Darren thought about it. Because being angry doesn't fix the drive core, he said. The machine doesn't care how I feel about what Merg did. It only cares whether the phase relay gets adjusted correctly. He glanced at Grat. I'm afraid every time I open something up and I don't know what I'll find. I've learned that fear and focus can run at the same time. The work doesn't care how you feel about it. Grat walked the rest of the way in silence. But he was thinking. Darren could tell the difference between a Vreth who was ignoring him and a Vreth who was thinking, and the difference was in the eyes. On the 5th day, Rovak came to the engineering bay and said nothing. He arrived without announcement, stood near the entrance to the drive shafts, and watched Darren work for close to an hour. He did not ask questions. He did not interrupt. He folded his arms, which on a Vreth of his size made him look like a fortified wall that had decided to observe proceedings, and he watched. Darren knew he was there. He kept working. There was nothing to perform and nothing to explain that the work was not already explaining for itself. When Rovak finally left, Grat looked at Darren with an expression that was difficult to read. On a Vreth face, surprise and unease looked similar from the outside. Darren guessed it was something in between. The commander does not watch engineers work, Grat said. I know, Darren said. He has never done it. In 30 years on this station. Then I hope I was worth watching, Darren said, and went back to the phase relay calibration. That evening, Rovak called him to the office again. This time there were 2 chairs. Rovak sat in one, which was unusual enough that Darren noted it without showing it on his face. He sat in the other and waited. The Vreth measure worth in 2 ways, Rovak said. He spoke slowly, choosing trade tongue words with care. What a being can endure, and what a being can take by force. These are the pillars. A warrior who can survive what would kill others is worth something. A warrior who can take what others cannot defend is worth something. This is how we have always measured. Darren waited. He knew this was not finished. You have not shown endurance in any way we recognize, Rovak continued. You have not taken anything by force. You are a small being from a species we have largely ignored. He paused. And yet the station is not dead because of you. That is a fact. I am not comfortable with facts I cannot place within a framework. Where I come from, Darren said. We measure worth by what happens after you're gone. Does the thing you fixed still work? Does the person you taught still remember? He looked at Rovak without looking away. I don't need a warrior's measure. I just need the drive core to run clean when I leave. Rovak was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the air in the office felt like it had weight. You are a strange kind of being, Rovak said finally. It did not sound like an insult. It sounded like a conclusion reached after careful thought. My father used to say the same thing, Darren said. The critical phase of the repair came on the 6th day. Darren had known it was coming. He had been building toward it, calibrating the secondary injector ring one small step at a time, narrowing the harmonic deviation, setting up the conditions so that the final adjustment could be made cleanly. The final adjustment required the phase relay to be tuned while the drive core was running at full output. It was a narrow window. If the timing was wrong by more than a fraction, the correction would create a new harmonic problem instead of solving the old one. It also required continuous, uninterrupted work. Not 20 minutes. Not an hour. The process, once started, could not be paused. Darren estimated 26 hours. He told Grat this at the start of the shift. Grat looked at the drive shafts, then at the electromagnetic interference warnings posted on the wall, then at Darren. I will stay with you, Grat said. You'll have to rotate out every 20 minutes, Darren said. The EM exposure. I will rotate out and come back, Grat said. You will not be alone in there. Darren nodded and did not argue. The 26 hours were the hardest work Darren had done in years. The heat in the shafts was constant. The pressure behind his eyes from the EM interference built slowly and then leveled off at something he could function through but not ignore. He ate twice. Quick meals that Grat brought down and left at the shaft entrance. He did not sleep. He measured, adjusted, listened to the resonance pattern through his sensor, measured again. Grat came and went every 20 minutes like a tide, bringing tools when asked and water without being asked, and never once suggesting that Darren stop or slow down. Around the 15th hour, when Darren's hands were starting to feel the tremor that came with long-sustained fine work, Grat sat at the shaft entrance during his rest rotation and talked quietly about the station. Small things, the crew, the history of Durkas, the way the light in the outer corridors changed color when the station passed through a dust cloud. He was not filling silence. He was giving Darren something to stay tethered to while the work took most of his attention. At hour 26, Darren made the final adjustment. He turned the phase relay by a precise angle, held it there for 3 seconds while the drive core processed the change, and released. The vibration in the floor stopped. It did not taper off. It did not wind down slowly. It simply stopped, The way a headache stops when you have been in pain long enough that you had forgotten what the absence felt like. The station's hum became clean and even and steady, and in the corridors above them, Darren could hear, through the deck plating, through the walls, the sound of Vreth crew stopping what they were doing. Grat sat very still at the shaft entrance. "What is the human word?" Grat said quietly. "For what you do. Not mechanic. The deeper thing." Darren leaned back against the drive housing, which was warm and still and running right for the first time in a long time. He thought about it honestly. "Keeper, maybe," he said. "Someone who keeps things running." Grat repeated the word carefully, turning it over like something he intended to keep. The clearance came through on the morning of the 8th day. A station aide delivered it to Darren's holding bay, which had quietly stopped being a holding bay somewhere around day 4, when a proper work table appeared and the door was left unlocked without comment. The document was stamped and signed, his docking code corrected, his ship released from impound. He was free to leave at any time he chose. He read it twice, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket, and went to the engineering bay. Grat was there, running the new morning diagnostics on the drive core, the ones Darren had shown him how to run 2 days earlier. He looked up when Darren entered. "The readings are clean," Grat said. "All within the correct range." "Good," Darren said. He sat down at the workbench and pulled out a fresh notebook. "I'm going to write up a maintenance schedule before I go. Monthly checks on the phase relay alignment. Quarterly recalibration of the injector ring. I'll write the numbers you're looking for and what it means if the readings start to drift." He looked at Grat. "Can you read the technical notation I've been using, or should I rewrite it in standard Vreth format?" Grat thought about it. "Write it in your notation," he said. "I have learned it." Darren nodded and began to write. He had been at it for about an hour when Merg came in. This was not unusual now. Merg had been coming to the engineering bay every morning since day 6, though his visits had a different quality than before. He did not assert himself. He did not make adjustments to settings that had not been discussed. He stood near the work area, watched, and occasionally asked a question that was brief and technical and directed at the problem rather than at the person. This morning, Merg stood near the workbench for a while. Then he set a small component down on the table beside Darren's notebook. It was a secondary injector coupling, the type used in the drive core's ring assembly. "This part has been wearing unevenly for 2 years, Merg said. "We have been replacing it on a fixed cycle. It still wears unevenly on the new parts." He paused. "I think the wear pattern is caused by an alignment issue in the ring mount, but I cannot find the misalignment." Darren picked up the coupling and turned it in his hands. The wear pattern was clear to him in about 10 seconds. He did not say this. He set the coupling down and looked at the drawings he had been making of the ring assembly. "The ring mount seats at a half-degree angle off true," Darren said. "It's within tolerance on paper, but over a long run it produces exactly this wear pattern on the right side of the coupling." He picked up a pencil and marked the spot on the drawing. "If you shim the mount here by about 0.4 millimeters, the wear should even out." Merg looked at the drawing. He looked at the wear pattern on the coupling. He looked at the drawing again. 0.4 millimeters, he said. 0.4, Darren confirmed. Merg picked up the coupling, looked at it one more time, and left. He did not say thank you. Darren had not expected him to. In Vreth terms, taking the information and acting on it was its own acknowledgement. It was more than most people managed. Darren spent 2 more days writing. He wrote the maintenance manual in his own notation first, then worked through a translation layer with Grat, converting the key terms into readable Vreth technical language. The result was imperfect. The Vreth language did not have words for several of the concepts, so they invented them together, using Vreth roots and human meanings hammered into shapes that fit both. It was the kind of language that grew in the space between 2 people trying to understand each other across a gap, and it was, in its way, more precise than either of their native vocabularies for this particular subject. On the morning of the 10th day, Darren handed the completed manual to Grat. Not to Rovak, not to Merg, to Grat, who had been there from the beginning, who had counted the pulse timing from the doorway before he knew what it meant, who had spent 20-minute rotations cycling in and out of an EM-flooded shaft for 26 hours without complaint. Grat held the manual with both hands. He looked at the weight of it, the full 140 pages of careful notation and translated terms, and he said nothing for a moment. "You did not have to write this," he said. "The drive core will need checking in 30 days, Darren said. "Now you know how to check it." Rovak called him to the command deck an hour before departure. The senior crew was present. A formal arrangement, chairs and standing positions arranged in the traditional Vreth pattern for official recognition. Darren had not seen this before and did not know what it meant, but he stood straight and kept his hands at his sides. Rovak stepped forward and held out a small metal disc. It was the size of Darren's palm, dark, engraved on both sides with deep Vreth markings. A station mark, Rovak said. It carries the authority of Durkas. At any Vreth outpost that honors this mark, you will be received as a being of recognized value. You will not be detained without cause. You will not be turned away. He paused. This has not been given to a non-Vreth before. Darren reached out and took the disc with both hands. It was the correct Vreth gesture for receiving something of significance. He did not know that. He did it anyway, the natural instinct of someone who had spent years taking things carefully, because careful hands broke fewer things. Rovak noticed. His eyes moved to Darren's hands and then back to his face, and something in the commander's expression shifted by a degree that was small but visible to anyone who had been watching carefully. Safe travel, Rovak said. Thank you, Darren said. Keep the compensators off the drive output. Let the relay do the work. He thought, for a moment, that Rovak almost smiled. He was not certain. He tucked the metal disc into his jacket pocket, next to the clearance document, and walked toward the docking seal. Grat walked with him to the docking seal. They did not say much. The corridor between the command deck and the docking ring was long, and most of it passed in silence, the kind of silence that is not uncomfortable but simply full, the way the end of something long tends to feel when you have been paying attention to it. At the seal, Grat stopped. He looked at Darren for a moment with the directness that Vreth used when they were saying something they meant to stick. You will come back, Grat said. It was not a question. It was the Vreth way of saying something they wanted to be true strongly enough that they stated it as fact first and let the universe decide whether to agree. Darren looked at him. Things break, he said. I'll come back. He stepped through the docking seal and into his ship. Rovak was standing at the viewport on the command deck when the small freighter disconnected from the station and began to pull away. He watched it go, a battered, ordinary ship with no military markings and no weapons array and no reason to be remembered by anyone who measured ships by what they could do in a fight. He stood there until it was a point of light among other points of light, and then until it was not distinguishable from the stars. He thought about Varek. The Vreth concept had no clean translation into other languages, which was perhaps the point. Varek was the measure of a being's worth, expressed through what they could survive and what they could claim. Generations of Vreth had lived and died inside that definition. Rovak had built his entire career inside it, and he had never found it lacking. He found it lacking now, not because it was wrong, because it was incomplete. The human had not survived anything exceptional. He had sat on a floor and listened. He had written numbers in a small notebook. He had worked in hot, irradiated shafts for hours on end without a word of complaint, not because he was too tough to feel the discomfort, but, Rovak suspected, because the work simply mattered more to him than the discomfort did. He had fixed a machine that no one on the station had known was broken, and he had left behind a manual so that the people who stayed could keep it running after he was gone. That last part was what stayed with Rovak. A Vreth warrior who won a battle claimed the victory and moved on. They did not, as a general rule, leave behind instructions so that someone else could replicate the victory without them. The Vreth concept of strength was inherently personal. It lived in the body and died with it. The human had left his knowledge in a book. He had spent 2 extra days making sure the knowledge was in a form that Grat could use. He had built something that would outlast his presence, and he had done it quietly, without being asked, as though it were simply the obvious thing to do. Rovak turned from the viewport and went to his desk. He opened the station's permanent personnel record, the archive that held the names of every Vreth who had served Durkas with distinction. It was a long record. It went back 200 years. Every name in it was Vreth. He found the entry category marked for service to the station that had preserved its function and its crew. He entered a name. One name. A human name that sat strangely among the Vreth's syllables around it and did not apologize for standing out. He closed the record without any ceremony. Below him, in the engineering bay, Grat was running the afternoon diagnostics on the drive core. The readings were clean. The phase relay was holding its calibration within the correct range. In 30 days, Grat would check it again, using the notation in a 140-page manual that he had already memorized half of, because that was the kind of person Grat was becoming now, and he was not entirely sure when that had started, but he knew the name of the person responsible for it. The station hummed. Steady, even right. In his ship, somewhere in the dark between star systems, Darren Cole sat in the pilot's seat and listened to his own drive core. It hummed clean. He patted the console, a habit so old he did not know when it had started, only that it had never felt foolish, and reached for his logbook. He thought about his father, about a colony power plant held together with scrap wire and determination, and the specific kind of love that shows itself in keeping things running for people who depend on them. About all the machines he had touched over the years, and all the ones that were still running because someone had taken the time. He thought about a metal disc in his jacket pocket, and a young Vreth who had spent 26 hours rotating in and out of a radiation shaft because he refused to let a person work alone, and a commander who had watched him work for an hour in silence, and then, later, placed his name in a record that had never held a human name before. He opened the logbook. He wrote one line. Durkas, drive core restored. Station crew capable. Left one manual. Left one student. Not a bad stop. He closed the book. He set the jump coordinates. He checked the drive readings one more time. Clean, steady, right. And then he made the jump, and the stars became light, and the light became silence, and the silence was the sound of something still running.